Hello, everyone, and welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Phil.
And I'm Pat.
And today we're going to be exploring what it means to be a great airsoft player. Fundamentally, almost everyone wants to be good at what they do, on or off the field. Most people don't enjoy mediocrity, or worse, regular, consistent failure. Since airsoft is a hobby, though, the stakes are slightly different, and as long as you're having fun, you might not worry too much about whether or not you're good or great at airsoft. But let's say you did want to become a better player, to become a good or even a great player. What exactly does that mean? Well, much like a lot of the topics we've discussed so far, everyone's definition of good or great might actually be a little different. Is it someone who is an exceptional marksman? Or maybe it's someone who's fearless, or a player who is super aggressive and never sits still. In fact, no one quality will make a player good or great, and certain people will value certain skills more than others. But there is an underlying set of skills and qualities that, from our experience, makes the difference between a good player and a great player. And that's what we're going to talk about today. First of all, it's worth noting that there are undeniably players out there with tremendous amounts of personal skills. I mean, you've seen them at your local fields and on YouTube. These are players, they seem to be able to run a CQB field by themselves. The whistle blows and they're seemingly behind you before you even realize it, or they're hitting you from 150 feet away through an opening the size of a playing card. And there's no denying that these players are really skilled and quite good at what they do. But are they actually great players? And if not, what would make them great? So that's sort of where I want to start the discussion today. There are players, like I just said, who are undeniably masters of certain skills. But if that's the only thing that they're really good at, does that make them a great player?
I mean, it definitely can make them a really excellent player. But from our point of view, I think generally we want sort of high competency, obviously, but we'd prefer to have high competency across a breadth of skills rather than exclusively superlative competency at one really specific thing.
Yeah, so depth of skill is really important. One example that we often see on the field is players who are kitted out in a particular way and they only want to do one thing. So you got a guy there, he's dressed in a ghillie suit, he's got a sniper rifle, and he doesn't want to move. He doesn't want to push the objective. And in fairness, they might not be able to because of minimum engagement distances on the field and so on and so forth. But fundamentally, there are players who are good at what they do and they want to just do that.
Absolutely. I mean, you also get guys running LMGs who really want to provide sort of suppressive fire, but who are either encumbered by the LMG because it's really heavy, or just have this conceptualization of their playstyle where they're meant to sort of kip down in one place and lay down a huge weight of fire and not be mobile. And certainly, again, that doesn't lend itself to accomplishing a whole lot of objectives necessarily. Mm-hmm. Which is not to say that player can't be super useful. But given the choice in both cases, I'd rather have a player who has a flexible mindset and those kits, and who's willing to, both sort of push the limits of what those kits are able to do and willing to take more risks, move up, be an assaulter, than have a player just sit in one place.
I think about games that I've played where I've had more of a command role, right, a strategic role. The players who I thought were really great players were the ones that I knew that I could give them whatever task and they would be able to accomplish it, whether that is take your squad of guys and lead them here, push this objective, hold this, set up a defensive line there. A great player will be able to do any of those things. Whether or not they complain about it is largely immaterial. Those players obviously have a preference as to what they would prefer to do, but they're just as effective doing any of it, and they're capable in a variety of different situations.
And I think willing to take on challenges that aren't necessarily their preferred kind of challenge in airsoft, which is a really huge thing to have available to you. I know when I've done the similar sort of strategic role, the players that I'm most attached to as a commander, if you will, are, the ones who I can say, hey, grab these 6 guys and go over here and do this, and who will get that job done. And a special shout out to all the guys who have ever played medic in those scenarios and have just run themselves ragged, being everywhere on the field for 5 hours, just never ever stopping, always running from point A to point B to get people back into the game. I think really, to me, motivation to play and to play well and to accomplish your objectives sort of at the cost of personal, we'll say, comfort, whether it's, comfort with your role or literally the physical discomfort of just hustling around 5 kilometers of field all day, is a humongous asset and is really one of the things that to me makes a airsoft player a cut above.
Yeah, there's definitely a misconception where you see a player take the field and you're playing a team deathmatch and they just go and they smoke the other team within like 5 minutes and stuff. And that's a really good example of outstanding individual effort.
Absolutely.
And if all you're playing all the time is team deathmatches, then that's a valuable skill to have. But the reality as airsofters is we typically will play a variety of different games. That's fine if you're playing a game where there isn't any respawning. But if there are respawns, then what is the point of going and eliminating the enemy team, having them just move 15, 20 feet over, respawn, and come back out? You haven't really accomplished anything. That's not to say that that particular skill set is never useful and you don't want players who are capable of doing that. But just being able to do that is only one aspect of what will make a player great. And in point of fact, you can be a great airsoft player without necessarily being the kind of player who will flank around the enemy team and kill all of them in like 15 seconds.
And in fact, as much as I love having those personal skills players on my team and putting them to use, in a longer sort of milsim kind of game, or even a bigger, just, half-hour long game that's not a team deathmatch, those players are not necessarily as useful. They can be really useful, don't get me wrong, but if I send you to eliminate 6 guys and you do it in 30 seconds, fantastic. But I've played with players who have really high personal skills, but who then want to be going and finding other people to fight immediately, and who won't stay and hold ground. And if the objective is to take a piece of dirt and hold it, which is often the case in milsim and even, like I said, longer games, you're not accomplishing the objective that I need you to be accomplishing. And I've often encountered players who are like that, who are also sort of combative about being asked to stay in one place, which makes it, as a commander, much harder to utilize them well.
I would also say that if your expectation of a great player is the kind of player who takes the field and just dominates or whatever, and you decide, okay, I'm going to be a great player too, and you're going to mimic that behavior, that also sets you up for a number of different failures if you don't understand your own limitations with respect to performing in this way. And I'll give you an example. I played a game at Frontline recently where we decided, you know what, we're going to just do maximum effort. I'm going to run, I'm going to go as fast as I can, going from cover to cover. I'm just going to run this field. And guess what? I overextended, I overshot my cover, and I got shot pretty much right out of the gate. I thought I could push the field that hard and mimic what I had seen other players do. And in point of fact, I didn't have enough situational awareness, nor did I have enough understanding of what those players were doing in order to accurately replicate their performance. It's not to say that I wasn't good enough to do that, but just by doing and going through those motions, it's not quite enough. You need to have enough understanding of what's happening on the field in order to make those decisions in real time.
I mean, yeah, situational awareness is a tremendous part of playing airsoft. And so, if you can sprint across the field, wicked. But if you can't sprint across the field while paying attention to the threats that are arising and hopefully doing something about those threats, you're probably just going to run out really quickly and then get shot. Mm-hmm. One of the things about sort of the really, really high personal skills thing is there's usually more than one of those guys. And so, yes, they might kill 6 folks, but they won't always be able to do that. And again, it's not always the most useful thing for your team. We have players on our team who have gone out and, just crushed the enemy team in a team deathmatch. It's like, yeah, I got 6 kills. And it's like, cool.
Yeah.
But A, it doesn't happen all the time, even for the guys who are really, really good, who really have high personal skills. But B, that isn't necessarily the thing I want them to be doing in a longer game. For one thing, if you, as Phil just said, kick out maximum effort and try to just sort of go on a rampage, you're going to burn out really, really quickly if you're trying to do that for 8 hours.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of touched on it before, but another very important piece of great airsoft players is they understand their own limitations and the limitations of their kit. So normally what this will actually mean is that that individual player will take steps to appreciate where they are limited and then take corrective action whenever possible, right? So what we will typically see from great players is recognizing what pieces of kit are not working for them and then ditching them, replacing them, being sort of self-evaluative or being open to receiving feedback from people to tell them, yeah, this worked well, or this kind of sucked, you need to look at this, you need to look at that. And those players will then take action to make sure that those places where they're limited either are no factor or they are compensating for it on the field, right? So they understand, okay, well, I can't engage from up close because XYZ reasons, so I'm going to make sure that I'm positioned in the right places to make the most of whatever limitations I have. So it is as least impactful as possible.
That applies to sort of this entire process, right? I think one of our consistent themes across the podcast so far has been that if you're doing something, you really need to be willing to evaluate yourself and go, man, did that suck? Do I need to think about how I did that or why I did that? One of our teammates, Chris, is really good at walking past me and going, Pat, are you useful where you are? And I mean, sometimes the answer is, yeah, absolutely. I'm killing that dude right over there right now. Go away. But sometimes the answer is, yeah, no, I'm like a full half a line or a full line behind the rest of the team. And yes, my rifle has a lot of reach, but I'd be way more effective if I bumped up to where they are to help push the line forward.
And if you're a great player, you're having that internal dialogue with yourself consistently. And that's not to say you're not a great player, Pat, but what I mean is, in a great player, we would expect them to constantly have that dialogue with themselves rather than necessitating someone else come by and say, hey, what are you doing right now? And Chris has said this to me many times, but when he takes the field, he's constantly trying to ask himself, am I being effective where I am right now, or do I need to go somewhere else to be more effective? And a great player will be asking themselves that question constantly, right? You get behind cover, maybe you engage, you hit your target. Okay, what's next? What's next, right?
Yeah, it's really easy. Certainly, especially like for me at the beginning of the day, I'm notorious for being kind of slow to wake up and lazy when I forget to remember coffee. You know, I've definitely played a lot of airsoft games where I wasn't even a good player, arguably, because I was like, well, where I am is sort of effective and that's good enough, and I'm just going to stay here because I don't really want to put in the effort to do something right now. And I mean, saying that, I'm kind of ashamed of having played games thinking that way. One thing that I've been really bad for over the course, I think, of my entire time playing airsoft is showing up and being like, well, playing in a leadership role today or like giving tactical advice or strategic advice feels like effort, so I'm not going to do it, when, you know, I spend a ludicrous amount of my time reading tactical manuals and historical ones and playing war games that use tactics as a core concept, and we've played a lot of skirmishes where we might have done better had I stepped up and actually opened my mouth. But I was like, oh, it's early in the morning.
For sure. The other piece around understanding your limitations and not being sort of constrained by them is knowing your kit.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
You need to know how all of your kit performs, and you need to be proficient at using it. We've touched on this before, but you should not be spending any of your active brain power to think about what you need to do with your kit with respect to like basic common functions. If your gun goes down and you need to troubleshoot them, that's a different story, right? But when it comes to transitioning your gun, when it comes to switching shoulders, when it comes to reloading your mags, when it comes to utilizing a grenade from your belt, dumping a mag, putting it in your dump pouch, anything that is your basic sort of function on the field, you need to be proficient enough to do those things without thinking. And that does include snap shooting, that does include getting on target, that does include manipulating your fire selector if that's part of what you're training. All of that needs to be second nature. And the reason why is because when you're not using your active brain power on those things, when you're not focusing on those things, you're actually thinking about everything else that's going on the field, which sort of brings us to our second point, which is really about situational awareness. Players who are great airsoft players are able to understand what's going on the field at any given time. Now, you might think, well, I can only see what I can see. That's true, but if you actually pay attention to what's going on the field, now assuming your field is not, like hectares of space, like on an average airsoft field, you can get a pretty good sense of what's going on just by looking around and talking with your teammates on the radio. And exceptional airsoft players understand where they are on the field and what exactly they are doing and what they are causing in order to make good decisions.
Yeah, you need to play tactically, for want of a sort of easier way of putting it. You want to make sure that you are aware of how you're causing the enemy to react by doing everything you're doing. You want to listen and be aware that, oh, there's a huge weight of fire going on over there. I've flanked it. It's probably not my team because I can see them. Okay, cool. I will go around and be super useful. Relative to going, well, there's a whole bunch of fire going on over there. That's not my sector. I'm supposed to watch my sector. I'll stay put.
Unless that's specifically what you've been instructed to do.
Well, yeah, if you've been told, stay here, under no circumstances leave, we must hold this objective, yeah, probably don't leave.
Yeah.
But, if you're just sort of like, oh, I've cleared this part of the play area, and holding that part of the play area isn't your objective, get on the hop.
Yeah. And a lot of people think that situational awareness is just perceiving what is around you. And that is one piece of situational awareness, but it is not the whole piece.
That's an important piece, I think, but...
Agreed. It's an important piece, but it's called situational awareness, aka you are aware of what the current situation is. Not just what is directly in front of you or to your sides, but what is actually going on the field right now. And like Pat said, if you've got a heavy weight of fire on your left-hand side and you've got friendlies that way, do you need to respond to that situation? Is that something that you can actually go and affect? If you've got orders to stay put or whatever, that's fine. But, 9 times out of 10, you can perceive what is going on the field. But do you really understand what's happening? And that's what makes good players great, is they're able to perceive what's happening, they can understand what the current situation is, and then finally, they're able to make a decision that allows them to act in the most appropriate way. So another way of thinking about it is, I'm sure many of you listening, probably most of you have played video games, you've played first-person shooters, but you've also may have played real-time strategy games. What you're trying to do with situational awareness in your mind is to go from that first-person view from your first-person shooters to the top-down view that you get from an RTS game, real-time strategy game, right? To see where you are in cover and where everything else is on the field, where people are moving. And imagine if you were playing that airsoft game you're in from the top-down view and you could see yourself, where would you go? You understand what's going on the field? Where would you move, right? How would you move to support your team? That is what great players are capable of doing, and not just in terms of the small scale of like this particular cover to that cover, but in a larger sense, you being able to take your teammates and move them around.
Even in those situations where you are, say, tasked to hold a specific piece of dirt, if you're not in contact with the enemy and you know that, 50 feet to the left of you, your team is, and there are 6 guys there, you probably don't need 6 guys to hold that right now. Take 3 of them, take 4 of them, go mess with the enemy's plans, right? The goal should be to defeat the enemy, obviously, in detail wherever you can. That's the high personal skills guy who's killing 6 dudes, no problem. But also to use your ability to defeat the enemy in detail to actually affect the overall outcome of whatever is going on, right? So if I've got that one high personal skills guy and there are 4 of us, I might just send him and say, all right, go kill 6 guys, free up our line to advance.
The other piece around situational awareness is also not just understanding what is happening on the field, but also what is going to happen on the field. And in sports terms, that's called reading the play, right? If you've played airsoft before, or if you played, paintball before, chances are you have been in a similar situation that you are in right now. What happened then? Right? The last time you sat in cover and did nothing and you were in the situation, what happened? Did you get hit? Okay, well then you probably shouldn't stick around because last time you did this, you got hit. Similarly, for many of us, there have been lots of times where we're in a firefight with someone and we shoot the piece of cover and then we realize that they heard the BBs hitting the piece of cover and now they're not coming out to shoot again for a couple seconds. how are you going to use this knowledge to your advantage? How are you going to use your experience of what's happened in the past to understand what actions or what reactions your actions are going to cause on the field in order for you to utilize them? And that's another thing that great players excel at, which is understanding how they can shape the current battlefield in order to give themselves an advantage.
Yeah, Wayne Gretzky is not just a brilliant, or was not just a brilliant hockey player because of his ability to score goals, but because of his ability to understand what was going on the entirety of the ice as he was playing, and to use that to his team's advantage.
And when it comes to any sport or anything that humans do, overall and in general, we are predictable. When you shoot at someone and it hits the cover, 9 times out of 10, they're going to duck down behind that piece of cover. That is predictable. You know that that's what they're going to do. Or you have a very strong suspicion that when you do X, the enemy is going to do Y.
Which means that, as an example, if you're firing at a piece of cover and you know a particular piece of it is louder than the other parts, hit that one, you know they're going to stay down, you've suppressed them, move. Right? Don't just stay there. One of the most common things that I see people do in airsoft that I think is a mistake, and I certainly have done it plenty, is just engage in that pop up, pop down duel with some guy. You're not gaining advantage there. You're relying really highly on personal skills and honestly also sort of luck of the draw, who pops out at the right second to get the kill, when you could go 2 shots, move. And they're down, and they no longer know where you are, so when they come up again, you have a huge advantage.
So, some of the qualities that we've talked about so far, depth is super important. You need to be able to be good at multiple things, or if you're not going to be good at them, to understand where your limitations are going to be.
Absolutely.
Situational awareness, so having a really good understanding of not just what is happening in front of you on the field, but what the battlefield situation is, and also having a good sense of what is going to happen, which you build over experience.
And just bringing your brain to the fight.
Yeah, and a critical piece of that is not having to manage any of your equipment, right? Like we said, the least amount of time you spend managing your kit, the more you can think about what's actually going on. Use your brain for something useful.
Yeah, you don't really want to have to look for your pistol every time you need to draw it. You want it to just be in your hand. Muscle memory is king.
A third very important feature of a great player is they are a team player. We need to understand and agree as airsofters that airsoft is a team sport. Like, yeah, you can have a one-off team deathmatch, speed soft, pistols only game, whatever, that's fun. But when we're talking about objective-based games, mil-sim games, longer tail games, even simple objective games like Capture the Flag or, Bomb Rush or whatever, all of these games rely on teamwork. And that is especially true if the game mode that you're playing involves respawns. Because you can't just rely on just killing the enemy team. It's timer-based. You need to control an objective. You need to do a lot of stuff. And fundamentally, a great airsoft player is someone who is going to play with the team, have a team player mindset, and that can reflect in a few different ways, right?
Yeah, I mean, we don't necessarily mean you have to be on a team, right? Obviously, we are both members of the Storm Riders. We both get together. We have team practice, all that sort of thing. But it's not necessarily about being on a team and having, the same patch on. It's a matter of playing effectively with others, right? One of the key things that we recruit people based on, honestly, is sort of, is this person fun to play with, and does this person play well with others?
And we talked about at the start that lots of people think that a great airsoft player is a guy who can go lone wolf and kill 6 players on the backside of the enemy team and all this kind of stuff. And while they have enormous personal skills, that does not necessarily mean they are a team player. And we've touched on this in a few other episodes. We have had players on our team who were sort of lone wolves and they just go off and do their own thing. But they cannot be relied on to do certain things by themselves. Will they go and hold an objective? Maybe not, right? Because they're going to get bored and decide to go to do their other thing. Or they're not on comms for some reason and you just lose them.
And because, as great as having a player on your team who's, being the Chuck Norris of airsoft is, it doesn't actually necessarily work out well for you, right? If one guy goes and takes out 6 people and then has to hold an objective, the personal skill set that allows you to take out those 6 people involves a lot of firing and moving. It involves a lot of, using surprise to your advantage and stuff like that. One of the factual rules of airsoft in general is just, eventually that lone player is going to get hit due to sheer volume of BBs that can be output in his direction by 2 or 3 or even 4 dudes, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's that old meme of the USMC rules to gunfighting, and, the first rule is bring a gun. The second rule is bring as many friends with guns as possible. And every time I want to go do something alone on the field, I always remind myself of that. Whatever I'm doing, it will be way better if I have someone with me. Because if I start taking fire, now it's not just one gun returning fire, it's 2 guns. And with 2 guns, you can fire and maneuver, you can do a whole lot of stuff. If you're by yourself and there's 3 people shooting at you, I don't care if you're the Chuck Norris of airsoft, that's not a good position to be in.
It can be the newest player on the field with a rental AK. They're still going to more than double your effectiveness simply by being another body that can put rounds down range and allow you to maneuver. Or frankly, if you want to do the firing part, you can teach them. You can get them to get practical experience about how fire and maneuver works from both sides. And that will be vastly more effective, right? A fire team, and this is something we have succeeded, I think, in eventually training in all of the lone wolf players who've played with us too, is just, working with a fire team may not sort of feel as badass all of the time, but it is way more effective.
And like you just touched on, there's a huge part there, especially if you're on a more organized team, around the knowledge sharing. If you've got players who are really good at doing the lone wolf thing, can you maybe share those skills and teach the rest of your team? So, I mean, they're probably not going to be as effective, right? Like Jason on our team is notorious for being the lone wolf and going to do his thing. But by putting him with John or putting him with myself, I can observe and I can learn about the things that make them effective, and then I can start applying some of those into my gameplay, and that makes me more effective overall too in terms of my personal skills. And it makes him better at working with people, which in turn, especially from a strategic standpoint, makes him a much more useful player, because we know then that they can operate hand in hand with someone else.
To me, it's super important to note, like, a great airsoft player needs to be community minded, right? So they need to be about helping people to get better at the game. Our team is all about trying to share knowledge. We regularly schedule stuff where we're like, hey, we're gonna do a training day where people can come and we'll show you the basics of like shooting out of cover and basically how to improve your, rapid reaction shooting and stuff like that. You're not going to reshape someone into a brilliant shooter in a day, but it gives them the tools to go train. One of the most recurring things we've had with new players is going, okay, so like you guys came, we're going to talk about firing and moving and stuff, and then you're going to have to practice it. But also we're going to sit down and talk with you about why your kit is the way it is. Why does your vest flap when the wind blows? Which, we live in Newfoundland, spoilers, it always does.
Yeah.
So to me, a great player needs to be sort of a mentor as much as they can as well. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a veteran player, right? It just means if you have skills, try to make sure you're transferring them to the people around you. Fong is a fantastic guy to have come to a training day where we're practicing and have go, okay, what am I doing wrong, right? Like, how can I make this better because it's a thing you're really good at? Mm-hmm. How do I improve my snap shooting? Well, I do this. Cool, right? It works to the benefit of the whole team. And ultimately, if you're of the mindset that we are, it's a thing that you can try to make work to the benefit of the community so that you have better opponents so that you can push yourself to get better as well.
So in terms of being a team player, there's, like we just said, there's working with people on the team, there's being community minded. And then fundamentally, and I think when we talk about being a team player, the very bottom line is when you're playing with a team, you need to remember that you are on a team and work with them. So even if you decide to do your lone wolf thing, everyone should know where you are at any given time, right? If you leave your team in the lurch, they're in the dark, when we've played lots of games like that where it's like, where's Fong? Oh, he's in the woods doing his Fong thing. That's cool, but that's not helpful, right? And I'm not saying Fong's not a great player, because he absolutely is. But my point here is to say, if that is how you operate on the field, you are being less effective than you could be if you were just keeping in communication. Now, of course, you might say, well, I was, being really quiet, I don't have an opportunity to talk. Fair enough, but you're always going to have an opportunity to communicate in some way, shape, or form. And great players are players who are constantly communicating with information to their team in a variety of different ways, however they can, whether it's through hand signals or shouting or just talking on the radio.
A really skilled player who has sort of left and gone off on their own, who doesn't have a radio, can't be a great player to me, because if they aren't available on the radio, I don't know what they're doing. They can't make me helpful to them. They can't tell me how to be useful. And I can't go, hey, I need you to do something to cover me. Whereas just adding a radio for both players into that equation means that they can tell me where they're doing, what they're doing, and why, and I can react accordingly to try to shape the enemy into falling for that. Or I can go, hey man, there are 6 dudes shooting at me. I could really use you over here, not wherever you've gone.
Yeah, and that ties into the previous point that we made around situational awareness. If you've gone into the woods by yourself and you don't have a radio, especially if you're playing on a larger field, how are you going to know what actually is happening on the battlefield? How are you going to know where you could be most effective or where you might be needed if you are not in communication with people on your team? You might be in a position where you're, 500 meters away from where the action is actually happening. You might not even hear the airsoft guns going off. How can you be a great player if you don't have that awareness?
And I mean, even in, in the Red Cliff field that we play at, we've had people disappear into the woods during 6-on-6 team death matches, and essentially reach the point where we're calling them on their cell phone going, hey man, the game is over, I don't know where you went, but come back.
Totally. Yeah.
Right. And those players, I mean, they might be alive at the end of the game, but by no means are they necessarily useful to their team in what they're doing if they're 100 meters into the bushes, stalking the enemy through deep terrain when the enemy team is gone.
And that comes back to our first point as well around limitations, understanding your own limitations and what you're contributing to the field, and what Chris is always asking himself. Am I being effective right here, right now? And if the answer is no, well then what do I need to do in order to become effective? And if you don't have a radio and you're not in contact with the enemy, so you don't know where your friendlies are, you don't know where the enemy is, you can't possibly be effective where you are. So if you want to be a great airsoft player, you need to be a team player. You need to be a part of your team. You need to buy in to the fact that you are contributing to a greater objective overall. Again, if you're just playing a team deathmatch, then whatever. But if you're playing an objective-based game with teammates, you really need to remember that it is a team game.
And that applies as much to a 10-minute get the bomb to the objective on the team deathmatch field as it does to an all-day milsim game, right? One thing we haven't addressed, I think, I want to mention is just part of being a team player is trying to bring positivity to the game, right? Trying to bring we can win this mentality, and remaining positive even when you know your team is losing, right? There's a difference between going, oh well, the hell with this, and wandering off, or going, well, you know what, I'm going to put in the effort anyway because I'm going to have a good game even if we lose.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that a lot of the characteristics of a great player are also the characteristics of a great leader, right? We talk about sort of being community-minded, being team-minded. That doesn't mean that a great player always has to be a leader on the team. However, there's many different ways that you can be a leader, right? And leading by example is one of the best ways of encouraging people to do their best. And when we think of great airsoft players, they are players that other players can rally behind.
Absolutely, right? We've talked before about the fact that, rather than yelling at the new guy who's sort of sitting there bunkered down and basically not wanting to move because they don't want to get hit, you can be the guy who steps out, provides cover, moves, says, all right, I'm providing you cover, follow me. And that teaches them, not in a direct sense, but it gives them a model that they can follow. It gets them out of the cover they're hiding behind in the back where they're not effective, and it allows you to start bumping the two of you up the field together as a team and work together, right? So that's helping the new player learn. It's making sure they feel good and are having fun. It's making them feel like you treat them like an equal, which is really, really important. And it's going to help your team win, right? It's literally good for everybody, other than the guys fighting you.
So you want to become a great player. What are you going to do? Well, number one, you're going to figure out what things you're not really good at, or what things you don't really enjoy, and you're going to get better at those. You're going to figure out what are your weak points, what are the things that you struggle with, what are the things that you don't end up doing on the field because you don't really like them, and you're going to practice them and you're going to get better at that. That will help make you a more well-rounded player. You'll be more useful to your teams, and overall, that will just make you a better player, period.
Absolutely.
The second thing you're going to do is you're going to start paying attention to the field. You're going to stop worrying about your own kit, And you're going to spend some time looking around at the battlefield. Where is the enemy? Where are your friendlies? What is actually happening? And you're going to try and guess what the other team is going to do, right? Take some time to really think about what have you seen them do in the past and what do you think they're going to do this time. The reality is that most of us are playing on fields that we are familiar with, that we've played on multiple times before. In my mind right now, I'm picturing a particular field at Frontline that we play on a lot, and I think about where I normally see enemies, where they normally hide, and what are some things that we typically do to get around them, to move around, right? Those are the things I will be thinking about on the field and using to make my decisions around trying to shape what's going on and then to figure out what I want to do in terms of movement and so on with my teammates. That's the second thing you're going to do. So the third thing you're going to do is you're going to start to become more of a team player. And like we said, it's not necessarily your structured, organized team, but the team that you happen to be on during the airsoft game. You're not going to worry about your own personal skills. You got that on lockdown from point one. You're going to focus on your team. You're going to make sure that you're in good communication with them. You're going to make sure that you don't do anything by yourself. You're going to have people roll with you. And at the end of the day, your ultimate objective will be to make everyone around you a better player. And if you can make everyone a better player, right, it's like the old saying goes, the rising tide lifts all boats. As everyone around you gets better, guess what? You get better too.
And so ultimately, what we're talking about is a situation where you're a great player, not because you necessarily have the highest personal skills, but because you bring the entire team's ability to accomplish whatever objectives they need to gain victory together, right? You essentially become a force multiplier because you're applying yourself to the game in a way that allows everyone to be as effective as possible.
Absolutely. And I would go as far as saying as just because you're the kind of player who is able to go and run a CQC field and demolish the enemy team in like 15 seconds, that does not mean you are a great airsoft player. You have tremendous personal skills and it's definitely fun to watch you play and like murk everyone and that's all cool. But that doesn't make you a great player by default. There's a lot of other stuff. And if you're capable of doing all those things, but your personality sucks and you're negative and you're putting people down, you're not a great player.
So yeah, like the goal is to be an effective force on the field, but also to be a positive force in your community, right? So yeah, you don't want to be the really, really skilled player who then is just cruel and unpleasant to the rest of the community. You want to be the really, really skilled player who, after killing those 4 guys, goes over and goes, hey man, I noticed you were doing this, and like, this will help you get me next time, right? You want to be friendly, you want to share knowledge, you want to give them a fist bump for coming close to hitting you, whatever works out to improve their morale and make the experience of losing as positive as you can as well.
Yeah,
right?
being approachable, right?
Yeah, absolutely, right? Like being a good winner.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a good loser, because I mean, let's face it, we definitely get our butts handed to us periodically, and it's definitely important to respond to that with nice job, like you kicked our asses, great, not, grr, I hate you.
Absolutely. So far we've really talked about being more effective, right? But there's also the piece around not being ineffective. If you want to be a great player, you not only have to be effective, but you also have to be not ineffective. And what we mean here is if you're a soup sandwich at the game, you can't possibly be a great player, right? That means for us, your kit needs to be sorted away. The stuff that you carry, that you're bringing to the field, you put some thought into, it has a purpose, you have a reason for carrying all this stuff. On the flip side, you're also not carrying useless stuff. So, in the previous episode, we talked to John about his World War II impression kit, and it's super cool, but if that's what he's wearing for an objective game, it's going to be very hard for him to be effective, to be that great player on the field, because he's bogged down by an entrenching tool and a light anti-gas respirator and another myriad of like 60 pounds of 40s kit.
The reality is, when John is coming out to play a game that we feel is particularly sort of team goal-oriented, where we want to take the game really seriously, he is going to show up wearing his modern kit. So am I. I am not going to show up carrying the Garand as much as I enjoy shooting it at people. Mm-hmm. I'm going to show up with my modern assault rifle. I'm going to show up with my Glock. And I'm going to show up with everything right and tight and ready to go. Last year, when we ran a training day for sort of local community folks, one of the people who came out was a former high school student of mine. And he's put a ton of thought and effort into his airsoft kit. And his vest was all loose. He had a whole bunch of stuff that just wasn't strapped down correctly. And it took us 10 minutes to show him how to strap it all down correctly and to explain to him why it was more effective if it wasn't moving around. And he grasped it incredibly quickly. Like, it wasn't difficult to figure out, but it made a huge difference in his ability to perform instantly, right? So having that sort of self-thought about not just like, oh, I've bought kit that's really good, but of, am I making the best use of the stuff that I'm using? Like, of the stuff that I'm carrying?
So at the end of the day, you're listening to this episode, and we're hoping that you're wanting to get better.
We also hope that you're listening.
Yeah. That said, at the start of the episode, I said that what makes a player great will vary depending on who you ask. However, one thing that we want you to make sure to take away from this is that being the kind of player who runs and guns on the field, up and down the CQC field, murking the enemy team is really cool, but that's not enough to make you great. There's a lot more to airsoft than just being the kind of player who's capable of taking on an entire enemy team by yourself. Because 9 times out of 10, that performance is not repeatable. Right? It's not something you can consistently do every time, because that's just not how airsoft works. As we said, airsoft is a team sport, and if you really want to be great, you need to figure out how you can utilize your own skills to support an entire group of players to make sure you can achieve your mission. And if you're capable of doing that, then that is what's going to make you great. And we've outlined a bunch of different things that you can do to help you grow in that area. But we're happy to help you out. If you have questions, or if there's stuff in particular that you'd like to know about, let us know in the comments. We're happy to help anyone to try and improve their own skills and to get better and to become the best player they possibly can. The reality is that not everyone can be Wayne Gretzky, right? Not everyone is going to be a pro athlete, and that's okay. But you can still be the best airsoft player that you can be, and in that way, you can be a great player too.
And if you have suggestions for stuff that we didn't think of in terms of ways to improve play, we'd love to hear about that in the comments as well. We're always looking for ways to refine our performance and improve, and it gives us more options for stuff to talk to you guys about in the future and to communicate to the community at large.
So hopefully you found this episode useful. We often talk about personal skills and improving your own personal skills through drills and so on, but becoming a better player is more than just about improving your personal skills, and we do hope you take some of the recommendations that we had today in stride and give it a shot and see if they can work out for you.
Yeah, we definitely, as a team, have a bias towards creating content that talks about personal skills, because that's easy for people to assimilate, and it's easy for us to communicate via YouTube or via a podcast like this. But I guess one of the benefits of the podcast format is that we can take time to talk to you about building up leadership skills and building up play skills that don't focus on sort of learning to use cover or, learning to be a good snap shooter.
So thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. We really appreciate all the feedback we've gotten so far, and we'll talk to you next time.
Have a good week, guys.